Despite what you might have heard, the recent job reports for the United States have been far from good, and the same sort of story is being told all over the world. 4.3 million people quit their jobs in the month of August alone, and that number isn't going down. This trend is being called the Great Resignation, and it arrived in the wake of the lockdowns and the pandemic, sky-high inflation, and social unrest, the likes of which we haven't actually seen for decades. Many people have been pointing to the fact that unemployment rates are falling, but despite that, less people are actually working. The data doesn't tell the whole story here, and when trying to work out why this is happening, we need to be aware that there is a lot of nuance at play. That's what we're going to look at today, what's actually going on, why it's been happening, and the big one for me, is this the first sign of stagflation? But first, leave a like and a comment to bless the YouTube algorithm. If you want more content like this, then check out our Patreon and join our community of investors. You get access to our Discord, loads of exclusive content like private live streams, extra videos, and buy and sell alerts from my own personal portfolio. This video was made possible by today's sponsor, BLOCKFI, a crypto earn platform that can help you earn up to 9% on stablecoins, and you can get up to $250 in free Bitcoin when you sign up with the link down below in the description. So what's actually been happening? Well, people really are quitting their jobs at an alarming rate. In the US right now, we're seeing about 4 million people quit their jobs every month, which is far, far above the historical average. Now, this doesn't mean that unemployment is increasing, it's just not decreasing by as much as we'd expect. There are still net positive job creations every month this year, it's just that the numbers that we were expecting are now far-reaching fantasies. In August alone, 900,000 people in the food service industry quit their jobs. 700,000 people working in retail quit their jobs, and 500,000 people in healthcare quit as well. Now, all of this started with the virus and the lockdowns, but really that was just a trigger because the technology that we've been building over the last few decades has really allowed this all to become possible. So what happened to working in 2020? Well, working from home all of a sudden went from something a little unusual to the norm almost overnight. Thankfully, the development of things like computers, the internet, and software like Zoom meant that this was actually possible for the first time ever. If we go back 50 years, the idea of being in constant contact with your co-workers while being in different buildings, states, or even countries would be ludicrous, but the information revolution has changed all of that. Now, the technology for working from home has been around for a bit now. Zoom was founded in 2011, but during 2020, we saw a societal shift where it became acceptable to work from home, really because there just wasn't much of an alternative. Lockdowns varied in severity by state and country, but by and large, almost everyone in the world saw at least lockdown, and many of us saw multiple. Almost overnight, employers had no choice but to allow their employees to work from home, so they did. In a lot of ways, this has been a really good thing. In many areas, productivity has actually increased because people aren't just incentivized to look busy, so they just do their job and finish their work earlier. People aren't having to waste as much of their time driving to and from work each day or queuing up to buy lunch from the local cafe. Lots of people have been able to start productive hobbies or side hustles or even small businesses in their spare time, like myself with this channel. This survey of over 16,000 respondents from 16 different countries, carried out a few months ago by EY Global, suggests that half of all employees would consider quitting their jobs if they were not allowed to work from home at least some of the time in the future. But despite the fact that employees massively favour this new way of working, employers by and large don't, and they've been pushing to get workers back into the office and back to the way things used to be. Now, the underlying problem here might not be what you expect. It isn't that employees want to continue to work from home, but it also isn't that employers want people back in the office. The problem is that millions of people are leaving the workforce and they don't seem to be coming back. This means a weaker economy, a smaller tax base, a worker shortage, supply side shortages as well. So why are people leaving? Well, here's the cop-out answer. No one actually knows. Lots of different people have their ideas, and I have some of my own, but no one knows for sure. Now, I'll do my best to explain the various different theories, but the most probable truth is that there's a little bit of everything going on. The first reason, and the one that the US government or the Federal Reserve seem to believe in, is that the fear of COVID is forcing people to stay at home, to fear interacting with other people, and that is leading to people leaving the workforce. Now, it is true that some people are still living like this. I'm sure you've seen it as well. Those people who go around with a 2 meter long stick that they wave at people to keep them away while they wear a full-on respirator. And while these people are still around, there are far, far fewer of them than there were before. Most people, even those who are vulnerable to the virus, are more confident today than before. They are going out shopping, eating in restaurants, or watching films in the cinema again, and most of them, in my opinion at least, are not too afraid of the virus to work anymore. Now, the Fed and the US government claim that the Delta variant has been causing a lot more fear, and that it might even be damaging consumer sentiment and stopping people from spending their money, but there isn't actually any data to suggest this, and I personally don't believe it at all. I don't think that anyone who wasn't afraid of the virus in the first place is now afraid of it because of the Delta variant. There's also the idea that unemployment benefits, stimulus checks, furlough, and whichever other government programs to supplement people's incomes have replaced too much of our lost wages and caused people to not bother to work. Now, in some countries, there isn't much evidence for this. In the UK, for instance, the furlough program focused on companies that couldn't really afford to pay their employees. So to motivate them to not fire their employees, the government would pay some of their salary. The number of people on furlough has been dramatically declining, and if someone refuses to go back to work, then they don't get anything. The increase in universal credit, which is just a form of benefits in the UK, was only £20 or about $25 a week, hardly enough to convince people to not return back to work. In some other countries though, stimulus checks were handed out far more liberally in an attempt to stimulate spending as opposed to trying to prevent redundancies. There's a growing belief that vaccine mandates are the cause of this quitting crisis, but again, there isn't a huge amount of data to actually support this. It's a very polarizing issue, so if you very clearly sit on one side of the fence or the other, then you probably have a strong opinion about this. Now, yes, some companies have issued strict vaccine mandates, and some countries have gone even further. There is no doubt that some people have quit their jobs in response to these mandates, but I'm personally just not convinced that it's happening on a huge scale. One big possibility, but something that is really difficult to measure, is the idea that priorities might have just changed for a lot of people. We mostly want to spend more time with our friends and families now, and if we can afford to take a few months off work to do that, then that's great. Not having to spend 2 hours a day on a road driving from somewhere you don't even want to be isn't a strange thing, and actually makes perfect sense. Young parents seem to be choosing to spend more time at home with children, and people closer to retirement age seem to be slowing down as well, making the most of the time they have left. This isn't something that I can prove with data because it just doesn't exist, but we'll probably find out if this is the case at some point in the future, though we are probably a few years away from that point. One idea that I don't think is talked about enough is that the huge inflation in asset prices could be behind this change in employment, and it's something that Chamath Palihapitiya, of all people, has a pretty interesting take on.
And I don't want to go back to work. I actually think that's exactly what it is. There was this really interesting tweet that I saw on Twitter. Hopefully, Nick, you can find it. But it was some kid that basically said, I'm growing up in Atlanta, and there's a bunch of kids that I used to run with, who would otherwise be in the streets, right, causing all kinds of trouble. And these kids are now at home, like specking NFTs and posting on TikTok or whatever. It's just a completely different reimagination of like labor and time spent. And that's just a very small example. And so that maybe touches retail or maybe touches, quick service restaurants. But there's all these different things where now that at the end of this pandemic, people are making very different decisions about their time and how to spend their money. And again, I'll tell you again, there's a lot of people. You got to remember how many people in the United States have died or are dealing now with some reasonably important health issues at the back end of coronavirus. 500,000 people, 1 million people. I want you to keep in mind what I told you guys before. There is $70 trillion that has to get transferred down from all these baby boomers down to these people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. And don't think for a second that they're not making different optimization decisions around perceived wealth. So I just think inflation is here. I think the labor shortage is going to get worse, not better. I think we're going to have to pay people more to get out of it. I think prices are going up, input costs are going up, energy costs are going up. So this is it. And
I mean, let's.
I think that probably the Fed and the ECB are really raising this time next year. They're probably in a really, really tighter posture.
So these young people who literally used to run drugs and commit crime as a way of life have transitioned away from that into these other kind of things like NFTs or crypto, or even things like Forex trading and TikTok or content creation. Now that's something that just wasn't possible before. Go back a few decades and if you wanted to make money, you either had to go get a job where you had a place of work and a boss and a salary, or you had to create and run a real business like lawn care or power washing or something that you can sell to people. There was no way to create random art online and sell it all over the world to speculators trying to turn themselves into millionaires. So a lot of these kids who under normal situations might have otherwise gone out and got normal jobs and actually added to the economy in a meaningful way are now just exchanging NFTs amongst each other, trying to sell them on to the next person for more than they paid. Now the problem with this is that nothing is actually being produced here. The economy isn't actually being stimulated, even if GDP figures are being inflated, much like the broken window fallacy. Those who have made money from the crypto, NFT or meme stock booms are feeling rich, like they don't need to work because they have these sky-high Coinbase accounts, so many of them are just choosing not to work. Chamath's point here isn't that NFTs are the reason for the low participation rate in the labor force, but they are representative of the changes that we've seen over the last year, and there are 1,000 different reasons for why people have left the workforce that are similar in nature but slightly different. We then have the direct impact from COVID itself. Many people have died over the last year and a half, far more than usual. It seems like there have been about 700,000 excess deaths or people who have died prematurely due to the virus, and while it is true that most of them were suffering from pre-existing conditions or were already vulnerable or elderly, the fact is that most of them would still be alive if this virus had never existed. That's 700,000 people who have received inheritances over the last year who otherwise wouldn't have. We always hear about the huge transfer of wealth that's going to occur when the oldest generation dies and they leave everything to their children. And many people are starting to wonder what the repercussions of that might be. If, out of the blue, you received $300,000 tomorrow, would you retire? Would you maybe move to part-time work? Would you move to an easier, less fast-paced job? What if you received $1 million? While this obviously isn't the case for most of us, it is the case for some of us, and it could go some way in explaining why the labor force participation rate has been falling. There's also the fact that the S&P 500 is up 30% over the last year, and the housing market is up 20% as well. If you are older and you've already built some wealth, you've been putting cash away into your pension for a couple decades and you've been thinking of retiring, well, over the last year, between your equities and your home, you're probably feeling a lot wealthier, and many people have been taking the plunge, retiring and living off the wealth that they've spent their lives accumulating. The only way we're going to see these people re-enter the workforce is if their wealth suddenly disappears, if this bubble pops and suddenly they can't afford to stay retired anymore, or if wages rise, demand for labor rises so much that these people come back and start working by their own decisions because the money is just too good. So what does this mean for us in the long run? Well, we already have aging populations that are only really sustained by immigration. So this trend of moving away from work may well be here to stay. Obviously, in the past, the US has always had a far more committed population that values work and wealth and job success more than European countries, for instance. But maybe that is changing as well. The young are, by and large, left-leaning, and more of them each year are starting to feel disillusioned by the system. If this sustained decrease in the labor force participation rate continues, then something else is going to have to give. With the high inflation we're already seeing and the potential for it to continue long into the future, stagflation is very much a possibility as well. As of yet, this trend doesn't seem to be slowing down or reversing, but accelerating. Will it continue this way? Well, again, I don't know, and no one else really knows either, but I have a feeling that we're going to be seeing more of this in the future. If you enjoyed this video, then leave a like and a comment to bless the YouTube algorithm. If you want more content like this, then check out our Patreon and join our community of investors. You get access to our Discord, loads of exclusive content like private live streams, extra videos, and buy and sell alerts for my own personal portfolio. There's a link in the description to masterworks.io, a site that allows you to buy fractional shares of art from world famous artists like Banksy, which can be a great way to diversify your portfolio with non-market correlated assets. There's also a link in the description to BLOCKFI, which will give you up to $250 in free Bitcoin when you use it. Also, you can get 9% interest on stablecoins like USD Coin, which is a far higher rate than you'll get from any savings account these days. Thank you all for the support. Thanks for watching. Stay stoic. Until next time.